All right, so today we're diving into Skidmore, Missouri.
Yeah.
Small, quiet town.
Right.
Life probably moved at a pretty slow pace there.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone knows everyone kind of place.
Definitely.
But this seemingly peaceful place holds a dark secret.
Oh, yeah.
The story of Ken McElroy,
Ken
the
McElroy.
town bully.
Yeah.
And I have to say, reading through all this, this
Yeah.
guy,
Uh-huh.
not your average troublemaker.
No, not at all.
Like,
What struck me right away
yeah,
was just the scope of his alleged criminal activity.
right.
It's decades.
Yeah.
Dozens of felonies.
Oh, yeah.
Assault, arson, theft, even cattle rustling.
I mean, 21 indictments we're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, this guy cast a long, dark shadow over Skidmore.
And yet, despite all those accusations, he was rarely convicted.
Rarely convicted.
The sources say witnesses were just too terrified to testify.
Well, that's right.
Could you imagine the kind of hold this guy had over the town?
I mean, it's a classic example of how fear can just paralyze a community.
Yeah.
I mean, he didn't just break the law.
Right.
He broke the town's spirit.
Oh, wow.
I mean, witnesses knew that speaking out could have really serious consequences for them and their families.
So, okay, so we know he was intimidating.
Right.
But, like, what were his tactics?
No.
Was he physically threatening people or?
I mean, it seems like it was a combination of both.
Yeah.
He was known to stalk people.
Really?
Yeah, just park outside their houses for hours.
Oh, wow.
Just watching them.
Jeez.
There's even an account of him following a state trooper home.
No way.
In the middle of the night.
That's nuts.
I mean, this constant looming presence must have been just incredibly unnerving.
Right.
And then, of course, there were the direct threats.
Oh, yeah, bad.
Even allegedly brandishing a rifle at one point.
Seriously?
To get charges against him dropped.
Wow. That's chilling.
It is.
So it sounds like he really knew how to work the system.
It does make you wonder if there were any legal avenues that could have been pursued to protect the town from him.
Yeah, that's a good question.
It seems like the authorities were aware of McElroy's activities.
Yeah.
But they struggled to build solid cases against him because of the fear he instilled.
Yeah.
The sources suggest that there might have been opportunities to pursue charges related to witness tampering or obstruction of justice.
Oh, yeah.
But those were seemingly never explored.
It's just tragic how this reign of terror affected everyone in Skidmore.
Absolutely.
I mean, people were changing their routines, avoiding going out, living in a constant state of fear.
Yeah.
Did anything trigger this escalation in his behavior? Or was he always like this?
Well, one incident that really stands out
Okay.
is his relationship with Trina McLeod.
Okay.
He started abusing her when she was only 12 years old.
Oh, my God.
And when she was 14, she became pregnant with his child.
Wow.
To avoid statutory rape charges, he married her.
That's horrific.
It is.
I mean, it seems like he was preying on the most vulnerable members of the community.
That's right.
And the fact that he was able to get away with this kind of abuse for so long is really indicative of the power he held.
Yes. And it also speaks to that cycle of fear that he created.
Right.
He knew people were afraid to challenge him.
Yeah.
And he exploited that fear to its fullest extent.
And then things take an even darker turn with the shooting of Bowen Camp, the local grocer.
Right.
Was this a random act of violence?
Well, the sources indicate this was not random.
Okay.
There's a pattern of harassment targeting the Bowen camps.
Uh-huh.
And it culminated in that fateful day when McElroy shot Bo in the neck after an argument.
So this wasn't just another crime.
Right.
This was a culmination of years of pent-up frustration and anger.
Exactly.
Directed at McElroy.
This was the breaking point for Skidmore.
Yeah, it feels like the moment the town decided they couldn't take it anymore.
Exactly. Even though McElroy was convicted of assault for the shooting, he was out on bond awaiting his appeal.
Right.
And instead of showing any remorse, he continued to taunt and threaten the town.
It's almost unbelievable.
I know.
Sources say he even went back to a local bar. The same one where he had been before the shooting.
Right.
With an M1 Garand rifle.
With a bayonet?
And a bayonet.
Yeah.
He was openly making threats about what he would do to Bowen Camp.
Yeah.
Can you imagine the tension in that bar?
It must have been palpable.
Yeah.
He was essentially daring the town to do something.
Right.
To stop him.
Yeah.
And tragically, that's exactly what happened.
On July 10th, 1981.
Yeah.
Ken McElroy was shot and killed
In broad daylight.
In broad daylight.
While sitting in his pickup truck.
In front of dozens of witnesses.
And to this day.
Wow.
No one has ever been charged with his murder. It's mind-blowing to think about, isn't it?
It is.
All those people.
Yeah.
And yet, a wall of silence descended upon Skidmore. This case is full of twists and turns.
Oh, yeah.
And we're just getting started.
Absolutely.
So McElroy's dead.
Yeah.
Shot in broad daylight with dozens of people around.
Right.
And yet no one is talking.
Right.
What happened to Skidmore after that day?
Well,
I mean, did the town breathe a collective sigh of relief or...
I mean, imagine you're living in Skidmore at this time.
Yeah.
The bully who terrorized your town for years is finally gone.
Right.
But in the most dramatic way possible. And suddenly your town is thrust into the national spotlight.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it wasn't just a local tragedy anymore. It was a national sensation.
I bet the media attention was intense.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. This small town becomes infamous practically overnight.
Right.
Labeled as this place where people take the law into their own hands.
Exactly.
That can't be easy to deal with. It must have been incredibly overwhelming. I mean, journalists descended on Skidmore.
Oh, yeah, I bet.
Eager to uncover every detail of the shooting.
Right.
The events leading up to it.
Yeah.
Residents were bombarded with questions.
Wow.
Their lives dissected and analyzed by outsiders.
It makes you wonder how they coped with that scrutiny.
Yeah.
Did the town rally together, or did the pressure just fracture the community even further?
You know, the sources paint a picture of a town really struggling to come to terms with what happened.
Okay.
I mean, there was a sense of relief, yes.
Right.
But also this deep unease.
Yeah.
I mean, people were afraid of what the future held, worried about potential legal repercussions.
Right.
And the constant media attention just amplified those anxieties.
And then there's Trina McElroy.
Right.
Ken's widow.
Yeah.
I mean, she was left to pick up the pieces of her life.
Right.
All while dealing with the fact that many people saw her husband as a monster.
Trina's story is incredibly complex.
Mm-hmm.
She became a very vocal critic of Skidmore.
Really?
Accusing the residents of scapegoating her husband.
Wow.
And portraying him as this misunderstood man.
Oh, wow.
She insisted that he wasn't the villain everyone made him out to be.
Okay.
That he was actually kind and helpful.
That's a pretty stark contrast to the image we've been discussing.
Right.
Did anyone believe her?
You know, it's hard to say.
Yeah.
I mean, while some might have sympathized with her situation, the evidence of McElroy's reign of terror was pretty overwhelming.
Right.
And her claims likely fueled further division within the community.
Yeah, I bet.
Creating this rift between those who saw McElroy as a menace.
Right.
And those who saw him as this flawed but ultimately human figure.
And she didn't just speak out.
Right.
She took legal action.
Right.
Filing a wrongful death lawsuit against practically everyone involved.
Yes. She sued the county, the sheriff, even the mayor.
Wow.
Seeking $5 million in damages.
That's a bold move. Yeah. Essentially accusing the entire community of being complicit in her husband's death.
And it's interesting because while she never explicitly named the shooter in public statements, her lawsuit did point the finger at a specific Skidmore resident.
So what happened with those accusations?
Well, despite her claims, no charges were never filed against the individual she named. You know, the lack of concrete evidence, the unwillingness of witnesses to come forward made it practically impossible to build a case. Yeah. It was this classic catch-22.
Right.
Everyone knew what happened, but no one was willing to say it out loud.
So what was the outcome of the lawsuit?
Well, the case was eventually settled out of court for a significantly smaller amount than she initially sought. And while no one admitted guilt, the settlement itself could be interpreted as a tacit acknowledgement of the town's collective role in the events leading up to McElroy's death.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
So even in death, McElroy continued to cast this long shadow over Skidmore.
Right.
The town's reputation was tarnished. The legal battles dragged on.
Right.
And this looming question of justice remained unresolved.
Yeah.
How did the town ever recover from this?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And it leads us to this broader discussion about the impact of this event.
Right.
Not just on Skidmore itself, but on our understanding of vigilantism and this complex relationship between law, justice, and community.
Okay, so let's unpack that a bit.
Yeah.
What are the bigger implications of this case?
Well,
what can we learn from the story of Ken McElroy and Skidmore?
Well, on one level, McElroy's story highlights the dangers of unchecked power and the devastating consequences it can have on individuals and communities.
Right.
His ability to manipulate the legal system, intimidate witnesses, and evade consequences for his actions really exposed this fundamental breakdown in the social contract.
It's a sobering thought, isn't it?
It is.
That someone could wield so much power
Right.
and inflict so much pain on a community for so long.
And then there's the response of the town itself.
Right.
I mean, Skidmore's silence both before and after the shooting speaks to the complexities of seeking justice when faced with extraordinary circumstances.
You're right. It raises these uncomfortable questions.
Yeah.
About the limits of the law, the moral gray areas of vigilantism, and the burden of collective responsibility.
Right.
What do you think, listener?
Yeah.
Do you think Skidmore had any other options?
Yeah.
What would you have done if you were in their shoes?
It's a real ethical dilemma.
Yeah.
On the one hand, you have this community terrorized by an individual who seemed untouchable by the law.
Yeah.
On the other hand, you have this principle that no one, regardless of their actions, should be subject to extrajudicial killings.
It's hard to imagine the pressure and fear that must have been present in Skidmore.
I know.
Do you think those factors played a role in the town's ultimate response to McElroy?
Absolutely.
Yeah?
Fear can be a powerful motivator. And in Skidmore's case, it seems to have created a climate where silence became the only perceived solution.
Yeah.
But whether that silence represents a form of complicity or a desperate act of self-preservation is a question that continues to haunt this case.
So decades have passed since the shooting.
Yeah.
And while Skidmore has physically moved on, the psychological scars of McElroy's reign and the weight of that collective silence continue to linger.
Right.
Did life ever truly go back to normal?
That's a great question.
Let's explore that when we come back.
Oh.
So we've talked about the fear McElroy instilled,
It's her.
the town's struggle for justice,
Yeah.
and those shocking events that unfolded that July day. But what happened to Skidmore after the dust settled? Did the town heal? Or is it still living under the shadow of Ken McElroy?
It's a question that's hard to answer, definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, on the surface, life in Skidmore went on.
Right.
Businesses reopened, kids went to school, and people tried to rebuild their lives.
Okay.
But beneath that surface, there was this deep and lasting impact.
I imagine there was a sense of collective trauma.
Oh, absolutely.
Almost like a shared secret.
Yeah.
That bound the community together. Did that shared experience bring them closer?
Yeah.
Or did it create new divisions?
The sources suggest it was a bit of both.
Okay.
I mean, some residents found solace in knowing that McElroy was gone.
Right.
And that their town was finally safe. But for others, the weight of that shared secret, the knowledge that justice had been served outside the bounds of the law, created this sense of unease and even guilt.
And what about the investigation into McElroy's death?
Yeah.
Did it ever officially close? Or are there still lingering questions?
Officially, the case remains unsolved. Despite numerous witnesses,
Yeah.
no one ever came forward to identify the shooter.
Right.
And the authorities were unable to gather enough evidence to press charges.
Wow.
The DA's office cited lack of cooperation from the community as a major obstacle.
It's incredible to think about.
I know.
Dozens of people saw what happened,
Right.
yet they chose to remain silent.
Yeah.
What do you think motivated that silence?
Well,
Was it purely fear?
I think it was likely a combination of factors.
Okay.
I mean, fear was definitely a major component,
Right.
especially considering McElroy's history of retaliation.
Yeah.
But there might have also been this sense of loyalty to the community. You know, this feeling that protecting one another was more important than revealing the truth.
It almost sounds like a code of silence.
Right.
An unspoken agreement to protect their own.
Yes, and that code of silence only deepened the mystery surrounding McElroy's death. Yeah.
It became this taboo subject.
Wow.
Something people avoided discussing, which allowed rumors and speculation to flourish.
It's interesting how something so public,
Right.
a shooting in broad daylight,
Yeah.
could become shrouded in so much secrecy.
Yeah.
Do you think that silence ultimately helped or hurt Skidmore in the long run?
It's a complex question.
Yeah.
In the short term, the silence might have provided a sense of protection,
Okay.
a way to avoid further conflict and scrutiny. But in the long term,
Yeah.
it likely hindered the town's ability to truly heal.
Right.
By not addressing the events of that day openly and honestly.
Yeah.
The trauma just festered beneath the surface.
Makes you wonder what life in Skidmore is like today.
Right.
Is it just another small town? I mean,
Yeah.
while time has passed
Right.
and a new generation has grown up in Skidmore, the memory of McElroy and the events of 1981 are deeply ingrained in the town's history. It's a story that continues to fascinate and horrify people.
Right.
And Skidmore will forever be associated with it.
It's a reminder that even in the smallest, most seemingly peaceful corners of the world, darkness can lurk.
Absolutely.
And when fear takes hold, it can warp perceptions, silence voices, and lead to actions that have profound and lasting consequences.
The story of Ken McElroy is a stark reminder of the fragility of justice, the complexities of human nature, and the enduring power of fear.
It's a story that forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about our own values and the choices we would make when faced with similar circumstances.
Absolutely.
So, listener, as we wrap up our deep dive into the story of Ken McElroy, we're left with more questions than answers. Was justice served? Could this tragedy have been prevented? And what lessons can we learn from the town that silenced a bully? This case, with its twists and turns, moral ambiguities, and lasting impact, serves as a powerful reminder that sometimes the most unsettling truths are found not in the answers, but in the questions themselves.